Okay, I see people checking in from Brooklyn, from Troy, Delaware, Atlanta, Oakland, Regina, um, Philly, Winnipeg, Hoken. We all over Houston. I think we're giving it one more minute. We're getting started at 12:05. And we can get into it. So free to land, everyone. Getting started. Thank you all for coming out to the first event in MXGM's Land, Food, and Climate Justice Committee. We're so excited to share this space with folks and would love to see where folks are logging in from. So thank you so much for checking in the chat. Um, my name is J'Anna and I'm moderating today's conversation, checking in from San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland, um, Ohlone Lands, and I'm grateful to be in conversation today with Alsie Parks and Omowale, who have so much wisdom and insight to impart on us. So without any further, we could get into it. First, I'll be telling you a little bit about MXGM, the Land, Food, and Climate Justice Committee, and then we're going to begin our conversation. In the last 20 or 30 minutes, we'll have some time for audience engagement. So if folks want to drop questions in the Q&A, or when the time for engagement comes, if you want to drop in a chat that you want to be on stack, we can allow folks to speak as well, just to get some more engagement. So who are we? The Malcolm X Grassroots Movement is an organization of Africans in America, or New Africans, whose mission is to defend the human rights of our people and promote self-determination in our community. We understand that the collective institutions of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism have been at the root of our people's oppression. And we have chapters in Atlanta, DC, Philadelphia, New York, Jackson, Chicago, Detroit, and Oakland. MXGM has 6 principles. We actively struggle to defend the human rights of African people in the United States and around the world. We actively oppose those social, economic, political, and cultural practices and structures that contribute to the violation of our people's human rights, whether it be based on ethnicity, nationality, social status, class, gender, or sexual orientation. We demand reparations for repayment for 400 years of slavery, colonialism, and oppression of our people in the United States of America. We promote self-determination and must organize for the liberation of the African nation held colonized in the United States. We oppose genocide or the acceptable and calculated killing of our people by individuals, institutions, and organizations of the United States government through lynching, disease, police terror, and any other means. Our fifth principle, we demand the release of activists who have been imprisoned because of their commitment in seeking human rights and liberation for our people. These brothers and sisters and folks who are political prisoners and prisoners of war, and they should be recognized as such. And our sixth principle, we work to dismantle all systems that subjugate new Africans who are oppressed based on gender and sexuality. We must take uncompromising stands against all forms of sexist oppression and cis heteropatriarchy. Our work at MXGM is divided into organizing around freeing all political prisoners and prisoners of war, defending our communities against external and internal threats, training youth across chapters to join our struggle towards self-determination, building solidarity across international networks to strengthen our movement for liberation, dismantling patriarchy, and ensuring a safe, organizing space for all new Africans of all genders and sexualities, and protecting our people from the effects of climate change and working towards food and land sovereignty. And that last note is what this committee is about, and I'll get more into that in a second. Just checking the chat really quick. Okay, so the Land, Food, and Climate Committee, newly formed as of January 2024, is a committee that utilizes a Black ecologies framework, recognizing the harm of settler colonialism on land, the natural environment, foodways, and relations to land, while recognizing the ways new African people have navigated and lived with the land since their arrival at Turtle Island and before, in acknowledging pre-colonial African indigenous land relations. Black Ecologies, which is the title of the series, is exploring the historical and contemporary relationships between Black people, land, and the environment. Black ecologies understand the relationship between anti-Blackness and the exploitation of nature and ecological crises, and the imperative of racial justice to environmental justice. Black Ecologies does not only hope to understand historic and current existential crises experienced by Black people and the environment, but also encompasses a libertarian vision for freeing the land and the people where we can conceive of futures outside of destruction. And that's all I have for folks, and time to jump into the core of the matter. So I'll introduce our speakers very briefly, myself, and then allow our speakers to introduce themselves more fully and get into it. Alsie Parks is an Atlanta native that advocates and activates the use of food as an organizing tool for healing and liberation. Alsie is also the co-director of SAAFON. Omowale Adewale is a father, farmer, author, and community organizer born and raised in Brooklyn, now based upstate New York, where Liberation Farm is located. Omowale is also organizing member of MXGM. And then again, my name is J'Anna Lue. I was born and mostly raised in Portland, Jamaica, but I'm currently in the Bay Area, as I mentioned before. I've been a member of MXGM since 2021. Shout out to the Philadelphia chapter for being my first political home. I consider myself an inspiring scholar of water, climate, and the Caribbean. I'm currently an environmental engineering PhD student. And my entry point into this environmental and climate work has been largely shaped by my upbringing, being raised in rural Jamaica, by the beach, and my grandmother and my mother's commitment to making life and creating life-sustaining spaces through gardening and farming, and my father's affinity to animals, both wild and domesticated. So with that, I want to big up Miss Dell, Tanya, Jimmy, Manchineel, my hometown, Rastafari, my first introduction to Black radical tradition, and all who have come before me. and led me here, my intellectual ancestors and my familial ancestors. Now I'd like to open up the floor to our brilliant and beautiful speakers, Alsie and Omowale. Please tell us a little bit more about yourselves and what brought you to this work, what your movement lineage is.
I can start. Hey, everyone. J'Anna, thank you so much for the beautiful introduction, just holding this space for us. I'm Alsie Parks. Use she, her, honey as my pronouns. I come from a long line of Alsies. My mother is also Alsie, my grandmother, and my great-great-grandmother are all Alsie. And so coming from this very sweet lineage that I've come to think of like queering my mother line is like what roots me in the work. Like my grandmothers as my first teachers, as lovers of community, as who really like foundationally made sure that I understood that we are meant to use our skills to be of service to our people. Yeah, I love this question. When you're like talking about yourself, it's always yeah, sweet. So I just appreciate having a space to share. Both of my grandmothers were community organizers via just like Black Southern Baptist churches and involved in local politics and as educators in my hometown of Lincolnton, Georgia, which is in the central Savannah River area of rural Georgia. I identify as a queer Black Southern agrarian woman. I would say my movement lineage starts with my grandmother, Alsie Helen. The summers that I got to spend with her, we was at the church like 4 or 5 days minimum, every day of the week, just like so to watch her kind of like model the administration and facilitation that comes with being a part of community, that comes with organization, I think really gave me the foundations of why I entered and understand myself as part of this collective continuum movement lineage. I'm also deeply influenced by my non-familial ancestors, like Fannie Lou Hamer, specifically her rowdiness, her clarity of strategy, the ways in which she centered the material needs and quality of life of the people that she organized alongside. I also want to lift up Ella Jo Baker. She loved the youth. She was a nurturer and a strategist. She loved to challenge the status quo. I believe that she had a deep belief and practice of the people's power and reflecting the leadership and the valuable qualities that everyone that she met has inside of us. And just like her ability to see decentralizing her skill and sharing of her intuition and like moving on and cultivating the next. I want to lift up Cornelia Walker Bailey, who was seen as the matriarch of Sapelo Island as a cultural worker. She understood how important practice was in the preservation of her culture across the Gullah Geechee Sea Islands. And I also want to lift up Cynthia Hayes. She is the founder of the current network that I helped to steward, SAAFON, which is the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network. She prioritized kinship and deep care in our organizing, particularly with Black farmers across the Southeast and in the Caribbean. She's also fearless and held a lot of integrity. in her carrying of those collective experiences and stories into spaces, both nationally and internationally, bringing awareness and resources back to the communities that are a part of the root system of survival and nourishment for Black people navigating US imperialism from our homes on the land. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me and what brings me here in my movement lineage. I will also say I found the Malcolm X grassroots movement in 2011 through my sisters Mshaidi, Zola, who I think I see on the call, and Taliba. I consider MXGM to be my first political home. It offered me an incredible foundation. I found Habesha, which is Habesha Inc. is helping Africans by establishing schools at home and abroad. I've seen my brother Khalifa, who is also part of Habesha. So I found MXG and Habesha at the same time. It was the summer of 2012. I decided I wanted to learn how to grow food and build my skills as an organizer. And so like each of those experiences not only grew my chosen family, who like really supported me in cultivating my politic and skills. I also just want to like lift up just like the value of spaces and formations and kinship, like I found in MXGM. At the time, my chapter didn't necessarily have a land-based practice that resonated with the exploration of what we mean by free the land. And I'm excited because Omowale and J'Anna and I already like started having very sweet, juicy conversations to ground us before having this conversation. So I'm happy to dig in that more. Yeah, organizing in my native Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta on the east side in Decatur, alongside the city's Black urban growers and farmers in multiple formations is also really sweet. And I'll start kind of closing because I really want to hear from Omowale. That around 2016, I found SAAFON, as well as spent some time in the formative years of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance as the Southern Regional organizer, alongside really brilliant organizers with roots in MXGM, like Beatrice Beckford, Dara Cooper, and Brandon King. So I just want to bring all my kin with me here. So I'll pass to Omowale.
Thank you, sister. Thank you. I appreciate that, Alsie. And just the connection, everything you spoke about. And thank you, J'Anna, for that warm introduction. I'm gonna try to be a little brief, and because I think a number of the names came up and already kind of got us into the flow, right? I feel like we're already here. Um, if I could definitely acknowledge my wife Nadia Muyib Adewale, part of Liberation Farm and Black Veg Fest. She's in the building. Also Mama Santua, and I'm sure a number of other folks, family and comrades are here. So it's great to have elders in the space, and yeah, let's get this bridge work happening. And I'll say we definitely have to do some work together, in terms of land, right? And food. So what brings me to the work? I strongly try to focus on strategy in organizing. And even if I'm communicating, my best strategy is transparency, because I think oftentimes people think about it in terms of acknowledging, your enemies, but I talk about it in terms of establishing integrity. I think, folks, if they know me, they know I've been focusing on food and health for 20 plus years. So my entire, organizing, background, my background stems from my mom was a Black Panther organizer in Brooklyn out of out of Brooklyn, and that between 69 and 71. And I grew up with a lot of the songs, a lot of just the context in terms of why they were doing particular work, right? And so when I look at the connection, when we talk about this radicalization, of movements, and how sometimes, I feel like our community wants to get away from that. That's our tradition, right? That's the tradition that allowed us to even talk about land, to get us to that space. If we even think about in terms of like, 59, in 59, when we saw Malcolm X on TV, Black folks were scared to death. They were like, hold on a second, this sounds uh, reminiscent of when we were in the South, during the Great Migration, and this still was happening, but when the Great Migration, began around the 10s or 20s, we had to move and get out of that. You about to have us move off the planet, off the, at least off the, off the land, the entire country, right? Folks were, afraid because, and what we were talking about was just, we just talking about liberation. We just talking about, humanity, being recognized for our humanity, right? And so even when we talk about land sovereignty, I think, and we talk about food sovereignty, uh, it's tough for folks to stay planted on that, on food, and land sovereignty, and to push the envelope. Because if we were talking about freedom in 69, and we talk about Fannie Lou Hamer and Freedom Farm Cooperative, then at what juncture between 69 and 24 did we get some freedom, right? So we're still talking about it. And even then, when we talk about, Freedom Farm Cooperative, we only take the nice pieces that, tend to resonate. I feel like I'm already communicating this, starting, kind of early in what I want to get into. And we don't understand that connection, because, well, I'm gonna draw this connection because I think, but just because, this year is, it's a political year, right? It's an election year. And we always think every single election year is, it's more special than the last, right? Well, 64, staying on Fannie Lou Hamer and staying on freedom, there was a Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party that came into the DNC in 64 and shook the nation so much. We don't really talk about it too much in most spaces, but it really kind of defined, and it allowed us. I mean, without that, you probably wouldn't even have Black Panther Party. I won't be able to go into that too much, but I'll touch it a little bit. We wouldn't have the Lowndes County, Freedom Party, right, in 66, if we didn't have this work that Fannie was doing in 64. And why we say Fannie outside of, all the other folks, she was just the vice president, the vice chair, right? But I think that that connection to land, because she was a farmer, and she worked on a plantation. She was fired from that farm from doing political work. So, and she came into political life in 64. So I would like folks to, acknowledge that and recognize that she was 45 when she came into political life in 62. Excuse me if I said anything incorrect. But 62, she came into political life, right, as this farmer, right? And so if we look between that time and now, one, we moved off of the land. We were forced off the land, right? So we need to say that when we're talking about food and food sovereignty, forced off the land, so we couldn't even have, food. And without land sovereignty, you can't have food sovereignty. It's impossible. We're not going to make it out of the air. We're not going to, as much as we're going to talk about hydroponics sometimes, we're not going to be immersed in, in a pond or a lake somewhere. So we need to have land sovereignty so we can get land sovereignty, and then we can really, really, establish some food sovereignty. So this is kind of what the work that I focus on. Liberation Farm, and I'm happy that the Philadelphia, chapter had raised this issue. At the same time, I wanted to re-raise this issue, but I'm glad they had raised it in the context of being prepared to do that in MXGM, and value the leadership that J'Anna is providing to that process. For the Liberation Farm, the idea is to really talk about focusing on Black folks land, not making it and ambiguous about what type of land we want to do, because when it comes to Black folks, sometimes we can be ambiguous. Folks of color, of course there's solidarity along different lands, and of course we're going to recognize that we on right now consistently for New York, whether Pennsylvania, New Jersey, is on Lenape land. We're going to recognize and acknowledge, and we have to acknowledge the land of indigenous people, but we have to talk about Black folks' land and get more into how Liberation Farm does that particular work. So I'm happy to be here, part of this conversation. I'm honored.
Thank you, Alsie and Omowale. I think Omowale, you let us transition right into the questions. And so the first one I have for y'all is, what does self-determination look like to you, and what role does land play in self-determination? What does food and land sovereignty or Black self-sufficiency in food economics look like?
Thank you for generating these really thoughtful questions. What came to mind for me when first thinking about Black self-determination, or just self-determination in general, is it makes me think about the elder farmers that I feel really blessed to have been able to build relationships that say, I ain't never had a boss in my life. And really, like, these are farmers are people who day to day on the land that oftentimes they own and steward, if they're blessed to do so, get to choose how they direct their energy, what they spend their time and attention and focus on, where they grow their craft, and how they provide for their families and community. And so when I think about self-determination, I oftentimes think about Southern Black farmers who have fought to remain in that generational lineage. Omowale and I, when we were prepping for the call, talked briefly about the Freedmen's Bureau and the 40 acres and a mule for folks that might not be familiar. After emancipation, and after, we were newly freed, the major request and demand made was we need the land and the means of production. That's the 40 acres, and that's the mule. We still need that additional labor force outside of our bodies, and the autonomy to steward and produce on it as we see fit. And so I oftentimes think about that being the demand for Black people in this country who were finding new ways of living and of life, particularly in the South. And it could be a long laundry list of things that they might have needed, but to know that land and the means of production were so central to the organizing that was happening at that time. Because I also think about that. I also think about, I think at the turn of the century, I believe somewhere between 90 and 95% of Black people in this country were identified as farmers, as agrarian folks that lived in rural communities. And so I always root myself in the basis of Black liberation movements in this particular context as farmer organizing. And so, yeah, that's oftentimes what I think about when I think about self-determination. I'm going to answer that and then come back to the self-sufficiency in food economics, because this is a conversation. So I would love to hear from Omowale, what comes to mind when you think about self-determination.
Thank you. You better than me because I forgot that second question. Um, but yeah, I would say, number of ways to go about that, to discuss self-determination. But I think first is, I think we have to have first we got to start seeing things. I mean, I think it's some simple things, right? We're always going to talk about land sovereignty and food sovereignty, right? But also just in terms of being able to, decide, what our issues are, being able to have our own platform and focus on that and not be deterred, being able to have certain spaces and certain, events. And I think that the best organizers, I think you are constantly, testing that, pushing that. And what I mean by that is, I think when we're trying to claim space, right? So one of the things right now is for Liberation Farm, we claim space, right? That this amount of space, and we're 4 hours away from New York City, Northwest, and right now the entire idea is that it's for Black folks to be over there, to be able to kind of make the decision on what do we want to do with this particular space, right? But it's always interesting and kind of weird to me, that sometimes you have folks who would defend, you know, um, other people's, being able to be a part of your space, and be part of, be decision makers in your space, and even just let them kind of be around. But we have our entire history of being under, listening to, what white folks are going to say. And whether we were trying to, even when folks were, trying to gather during slavery, after slavery, it don't matter if it was during slavery or populist movement. Um, Folks want to see us gathering, whether we're trying to organize ourselves as sharecroppers. White folks want to be, and that was one of the reasons, one of the strategies of the populist movement. We look at it like we're going to organize around workers, but it was really to see what were these Black folks talking about. And so I think that self-determination, I mean, first we got handed the easy questions first. Oftentimes it's like, push back on that issue, on this particular institutions that we have. Let's make the determination, what success looks like. We can't say we're gonna say, oh man, look, Fannie Lou Hamer and Malcolm X and so on and so forth, and then do everything but radical work, and try to just go with the flow and call out a strategy. That is not a strategy. I think that is a lot of cowardice and a lot within this particular strategy. So when I think about self-determination, I think that we make the decisions, we build and we start exercising our autonomy. And I think sometimes when we think that's a strategy, no, we're showing other young people or folks who are not in the movement how to just take it, and how to make it self-determination a non-issue. How to make it where we don't have any decision-making power, over that. So I think when it comes to self-determination and the role that that I play in that is that came out when we started Black Veg Fest in 2018. Before that, we had that in our mind, and actually there was a comrade, this sister, who does some great work, and so I had reached out to her and had a meeting, and she kind of walked off like, like it was like that Facebook movie. She was like this: make sure make the website Black Veg Fest, and then uh, uh, and so in 2014, it took about 4 years, but we were able to do that because I was, clear that Black folks, and we say this sometimes when we get in these certain spaces, so I think we have to say that many times as possible, we organize our interests more so than we don't organize our interests. We also up against, counting certain means, often. Look at us and we talk about politics. We tend to vote the same. We're not a monolithic group, but we tend to vote the same more than any other group. We just need to be clear on why we're voting for folks, right? So when we did Black Veg Fest, we had a sea of folks come out. People would be thinking like, well, man, they're not gonna care about veganism. They're not gonna be vegan. I mean, I don't think, a lot of our community, are familiar with a lot of the folks who, have been, have been vegan. They need to look at, Google Dr. Alvania Fulton, and if the name is not familiar, and that's what I mean, that'd be interesting because you're talking about the 40s, you're talking about the 50s, you're talking about she was in South Side Chicago already with a vegan pharmacy, well, already with a health food store, had taught Dick Gregory, but so we have a history in that, right? So when we talk about food, but understand we also need to be talking about how we are self-determined so we can make the decision about what that looks like for Black people. And that's what Black Veg Fest was doing, was how does that look like to Black people? Because some folks are gonna come in there like, we forcing folks. Well, I mean, how many billboards you see that's vegan? Don't kid us, let's kid ourselves, man. Nike is forcing you. Burger King, McDonald's, and KFC is forcing you. They're forcing you. That's a consistent, move. We're giving options, so we understand that we're not going to organize the same way that other groups organize their people until that's so we bring options. And so there's been over 2,000 people that come in 2018, and now last year over 5,000 people. Black people will support, Black folks, but it also is important about the environment, how that actually, how does that work? We work a very horizontal manner, bring folks into the mix, and that's how we tend to organize. I'll get a chance to talk more about Liberation Farm and how it intersects with self-determination, later. So appreciate the discussion.
Mm-hmm. A couple of things that you said, Omowale, pinged for me. One was, the ability to make decisions for ourselves. I was thinking, and to like build and exercise autonomy. I also wanted to name like building our muscle and spirit for cooperation and collective work and governance. I think that's also like one of the like not missing pieces of the equation oftentimes when we talk about self-determination, because it can be centered, right? And I think that's one of the things that really inspires me about Black agrarianism. And so I love the kind of like Black ecologies framework with my work with doing like agrarian movement work. We talk a lot about Black agrarianism, and I'm happy to share more about like just how we frame that. But, interdependency was inherent and understood in practice. inside of like the practice of like self-sufficiency and self-determination. And so I just wanted to just like lift that up, because I find myself like in more modern or like current movement spaces, when we talk about self-determination, we don't always talk about doing that alongside other Black people that are also self-determining, and what our relationship is to each other. I just wanted to lift that up and maybe like segue into the secondary questions so that we can get through all the questions around like J'Anna, your question was also like, what does self-sufficiency, Black self-sufficiency food economics look like? And I found that question to be very dynamic, mainly because it's like, can we be self-sufficient without having the means of production, or just like the like basics for ourselves, independently and interdependently? I find a lot of inspiration in the cooperative movements that are rooted in civil rights organizing, but like the civil rights organizing in like the 40s and 50s and 60s, where like Fannie Lou Hamer, where farmers were coming together, who were oftentimes sharecropping, who oftentimes did not own their own land, to collectively purchase land, or to, find ways to make sure that farmers who were being kicked off of their land for leaning into organizing around the right to vote. That's also part of Fannie Lou's story. Like, it was kicked off the land because of their radicalization and their politics. And so like, what did it mean for her family and the families who were willing to commit themselves to political struggle to also still have a home, be able to eat? And the economics around it too is like, I oftentimes think about like food systems infrastructure, which looks very different as we have like placed it outside of or beyond like Southern rural Black communities being able to organize around their own food systems infrastructure, where, if y'all gonna slaughter a hog, like, we all gonna come use our collective labor, and y'all gonna take some of this meat home. Like, those practices were so valuable to like just this self-sustaining rural Black communities, that I always get really excited and eager to talk about what does that look like as we're like scaling, or like, fast forwarding to now, and what the organizing looks like, where it's just like, who growing grains? Like, y'all processing sorghum for sugar, like, who's cultivating the bees, and how are we in relationship with each other, and where are we processing these? Where are the transportation mechanisms and trade routes? Like, those things always like get me really excited when we start talking about self-sufficiency in the context of the collective. But I'll pass back to you, Omowale, if you have any more thoughts about, the economics of it all.
No, I think you hit a lot of great points. If you say the economics though, I think I might be able to, I could probably wait. So I got to get the questions advancing so we can open it up a little bit more.
For sure. Wait, Alsie?
Oh, I just wanted to shout out, sorry. Someone in the comments talked about growing up in a settlement community, like a Black settlement community. And I think oftentimes that those stories aren't told about the communities that actually did get their 40 acres, and like what it has looked like for a rural Black community to sustain Black land ownership for multiple generations, and what that looks like, 6 and 7 generations in. And just like, I just got really excited because like, we have people that actively live in those communities now that are still organizing in similar ways. So I just wanted to lift that up. And I know there's a place for Q&As, but the Isaiah in the comments also just like named like, yeah, food and like food and fiber, food and, you know, clean water, food and, you know, it's like all of these things are interconnected, just like nature teaches us. And so I just wanted to, I was excited by looking in the chat too.
Honestly, I was gonna say the same. I was like, I love the engagement in the chat, like book recs, websites, all the resources. So please continue to do that. And then moving on to the second question. And I think we actually started talking about this a little bit, well, a lot. How does land justice connect to other liberation movements? Because we began talking about how farmers' rights and farmers organizing was a basis of civil rights movement. And so I just wanted to open that up more for y'all to just deepen that and get into that a little bit more.
I so I think I think that's very important. I appreciate that question too, because when we talk about the Panthers, right, and even the symbol that comes from farmers, organizing in Lowndes County, Alabama, right? So we have to be aware of that particular organizing history, for land. And so we think about Lowndes County. It was some very interesting pieces that happened with with that being organized. Like, what's that history, look like? So before there was Lowndes County, Freedom Party, there was there was only one person then who was able to vote, right? That person ended up being a chairperson. It was John Hewlett. And so, but the way they organized back then during, in the South, and so when we tend to think about this liberation, we tend to think about the East, right? We even might think about the West, but think about the South not as much in terms of engaging in its liberation work. But here in '66, you had SNCC, right? Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and a lot of folks are familiar with SNCC in terms of Stokely Carmichael, with Kwame Ture, but really the way they organized, they went there to organize to kind of educate folks, but kind of step back, right? To allow folks to be able to figure out their own particular aims, how they wanted to, organize their system. What was their focus? Well, they went in there really how to organize. We talk about organizing today, and it's sometimes we just talk about educating, and it's a little bit again, ambiguous. They were trying to get certain political positions so that when they walked into, to register to vote, well, they didn't have to go through these different types of arithmetic, tests, math tests, all this particular process of preventing them from utilizing their power, because the Black farmers, there in Alabama, they were the majority. Black folks was the majority, right? It's very much related to Malcolm X grassroots movement, in terms of organizing, Black Belt, right? But focusing on their particular, their collective power, right there, so they can continue to build and grow. So the first time that they went out and they, so actually, I don't want my laptop to go bad to actually go out making this point. So at this particular time, you really didn't have, they weren't able to organize their power. They had the numbers, but they didn't understand how to actually organize, how to actually, go ahead and vote, but also just how to speak back, how to say nah. this is our focus. And I think this is consistent today, that we have the numbers a lot of times in our areas and we don't use that. We don't utilize that. We have the numbers often, and we end up thinking, we have to be more creative with it. Now we just have to speak truth to power, often. And so that we know exactly what particular steps we want to engage in, what's next, what's the first focus, what's our next focus, what's our particular aims, putting our aims together, so that we can organize for particular objectives, goals and objectives. And so for Liberation Farm, right now, we have a goal and an objective, right, when it comes to, land work. And right now, we just happen to be engaged in fighting with the USDA. We got 2 national cases that's happening. There's an appeals case, and there's a discrimination case. So there was a there was a report that was put out, about a 100-page report that really talked about going through this particular process was racist. But they said discrimination. They would focus on discrimination. They didn't call it racist. They didn't frame it, as being racist, right? They were really, like it was arbitrary. But being part of the process and going for those resources, those farm resources, they go directly to white folks. And so when I say that, I mean, look, when we talk about dairy, we talk about any animal agriculture, right? All of those resources, those subsidies, 99% of those resources and those subsidies go to white farmers. We don't get those resources, right? So we end up saying to ourselves that we're just going to do the work. We're going to just go ahead and do it. We've never done anything other than that. We've always done that. Even back in the day, we just say, well, we're gonna bail each other out, of jail. We gotta focus. We gotta organize ourselves so we don't even get into those particular spaces, that we take over, those particular spaces. And so the organizing has to.
Oh no, I think we lost Omowale.
Oh no. I could try to pick up where he left off. All those things, yes, yes, yes. Lifting up Nick and Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. Someone in the chat also lifted up Freedom Farmers, a book by Dr. Monica White. And in her second book, which hasn't come out yet, I got a little sample, but there's a picture of Stokely Carmichael on a horse, because that is what rural organizing looks like during that time. And so I just really appreciate always kind of like lifting up the dimensions of our organizing. Because I think oftentimes we want like the flashy parts or the big waves, when like people are like really dug in communities. But J'Anna, your question was, how does land justice connect to other types of liberation movements? Omowale earlier was talking about Fannie Lou Hamer and like understanding that like farmers or like people who are sharecropping were workers. And this is like this kind of like organizing around like workers' rights, right? It just so happened to be that they were working on farms. And it makes me think about my organizing life partner. Her name is Whitney J. And she says, our like organizing methodology is like, we're workers among workers, we're organizers among organizers, and we're farmers among farmers. And like that kind of like tying land justice to other type of liberation movements, I think is so important, because like, I mean, we all got to eat. Like we all need safety. And on the land coupled with meaning. And when I'm talking about coupling land with meaning, it's also like our families being well fed, full laughter, creativity, like being able to use our labor, our bodies in the ways that we determine gives us the basis for like what we're willing to protect and defend. And so I always like, yeah, when I think about land justice, I root it in first our relationship to nature and like embodying a worldview that values our humanity, not over our interconnectedness and dependence on our kinship with the natural world, but like all the living beings. I root my understanding of land justice in like stewardship, service, and responsibility to land that holds and can provide for our families' material needs, and that kind of like pleasure, nourishment, art, creativity, that like meaning too. And I see our like returning to the land beyond seeing land as a commodity for us to exploit. I think that I love when we lift up land as power, and I always like want us to like have like those land is power, just like free the land is such a juicy, like a statement and a frequency to like always explore with others. That's what I always loved about MXGM is like the rigor and the sharpening that we get to do when we're able to be in conversation and debate and iteration with other organizers and people that have like, you know, things on our heart for our people. And yeah, I think thinking about that like harmony energetically, like like what the land provides for us is really important. And it's like not also land in a void. It's also like growing the skills to sustain ourselves on the land too. I think that land as a provider is like one thing, but it's also like, how do you like steward thoughtfully? How do you like manage land? I oftentimes always want to like couple getting our land back and like acquiring new land with like the preservation and protection of the land that generations of families have been able to hold on and protect and defend. And yeah, just like really thinking about how land coupled with meaning, coupled with skills can like grow our autonomy and sovereignty. Welcome back, Omowale.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I did give y'all forewarning. Thank you for bringing me back. I mean, so I think we're still on land, right? So and I was talking about, you know, some of these things as we're kind of like hidden in the back, right? That we're having these individual battles, or these small organizations are having these battles, kind of like the battle that, you know, we're having right now with the Farm Service Agency and the USDA, right? Back then, like civil rights movement, the reason why it was a movement is because like the big four organizations, that was NAACP, that was the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that was also CORE, is, you know, as well, and that was SNCC, and SNCC was a youthful body. Alcie had brought up, you know, Ella Baker before, and you know, Ella Baker, you know, wanted that to be a space that was, you know, that was organized and focused, and it was youthful autonomy, right? That there was young folks that were organizing. So when we even talk about young folks in terms of on a different, you know, college campuses, you know, that root in that history, you know, especially for, you know, Black folks, you know, is rooted in SNCC work and the work that, you know, SNCC was doing. But they had created a coalition amongst themselves and said, are we going to focus? This is how we're going to do this, right? So even when they went up to and had brought up 1964 Democratic National Convention, when they decided to say, well, we want participation, we want Black participation in Mississippi politics, right? So when they created the Mississippi Freedom the Democratic Party, and they went up there, we're talking about all the coalitions. We're talking about all the organizations were going there and they were focused. Now, the main thing that kind of stuck out was what Fanny said. It was the work that Fanny was doing at that particular time, but it was really Dr. King spoke there too, and folks might not really remember that, but he was also part of that conversation. It just so focused mainly was what Fanny was saying. She was talking about the actual context of what she was actually doing. She was in the work, had only been in the work for 2 years, right? Coming to political life, through Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, could hear, even though at 45 was older than, all the organizers at SNCC, but could hear, could understand, and could also take that work and say, I'm going to do this particular organizing at that time. I don't know how much we have that. And I say that so it could resonate, right, amongst us, that there was, young folks and old folks or mature folks, basically having, there was a bridge for us, right? So a lot of that is actually, has changed. But I say that in the context of today, as we having that battle, I know folks, want to be on land, and we want to grow food. We want to talk about the history of the food coming from the continent in the context of right now. How do we feed ourselves? We also got to talk about the politics, because that is that radical tradition is how we able to create and build space. That's how we've gotten space. We didn't have any space. You know what I'm saying? Folks were sharecropping. Folks were sharecropping back then. We had different spaces, at that time. We had cooperatives, at that time. And we had these you had some farm spaces that even Alsie was mentioned in terms of the history. We had that in Brooklyn. There's Weeksville. James Weeksville had created in 1838 this cooperative space, right? This Black space. This is also Harriet Tubman had came through there, right? This is you're talking about like about 4 blocks, maybe 3 blocks, between the two, between where the Underground Railroad ran right at Fulton Street, where it's now Fulton Street now, and Weeksville Heritage Society. And so you had that connection. So yeah, we had those spaces, but that radical tradition allowed us to be able to deepen, on the question, so we can talk about the sovereignty, that we need to be able to keep it, that we needed to be able to grab it, because how do we actually get it in the first place? How do we actually get that in the first place? That wasn't a freedom. We fought for the Freedmen's Bureau, right? We were raising hell at that time. We were raising hell every single, all the time. So there was always a radical tradition. So I want that to be, and when we talk about the farm aspect, of this particular work, I think we're talking about that in terms of connection and building cooperative space, but at the very same time, we actually have to, claim space, like, Black spaces. I would love for people to, drop down in the chat, how many Black spaces do you know? How many spaces that are Black spaces, right? And so that would be very helpful to acknowledge some of those spaces, to build up those particular, spaces, and where the connections between those Black cooperatives and other Black cooperatives. As soon as they hear about it, because as soon as we hear about it, we're familiar with Cooperation Jackson. They were doing work, and we had communicated with them with some of the issues that Liberation Farm is doing. they had made that connection to us. It didn't even take long. We had made that connection. Of course, we got to know, what kind of work are you doing? What work are you doing? Who are you? What's your background? Oh, I understand your background. And so I understand where your lineage, lineage is, and your respect to the movement, work. And so when we needed that type of support, those folks, were able to, reach out and connect. What does that look like in real time? So we could get away from not get away from, but so we could connect this theoretical, approach that we have to this practical movement work. I always have my energy up.
No, I'm so glad you returned. It was a cliffhanger when you left. So I'm really glad you got to finish that thought, Omowale. I think we are going to move on to the next question just because we're a little bit strapped for time. This conversation has been so rich, but we want to give time for Q&A and for folks to get off mic later if they so choose to. And so rapid fire for the rest of the questions, but what tips do you have for folks that are interested in getting involved with land work and organizing around land?
I think Omowale already started kind of getting into that, which is great. I won't rename what you just named, Omowale, just for time, but go to land-based events. There's volunteer work days, laboring your body alongside people who are already doing it. Omowale named like, hey, we were trying to generate a project and we saw that even within MXGM's formation that there were other projects that were happening across the country that like, let me just pick up a phone or see when they having something and I can try to get down there, or, like, I think that is really important. Or even just like organizing with younger organizers who are coming up through SAAFON, the formation that I'm stewarding. I'm like, who's the farmer that you talk about? Like, if someone asks you about farmers, like, which farmer is on your heart? And, we have about 160 farmers in our network, and I have some that are always on my heart. And like, knowing your farmer, knowing a farmer, starting the practice of knowing where your food comes from, how it was produced, like investing in the curiosity around like dot connecting around food, I think is really important. Shouts out to Mama Santoa, who you named, was on the call, because I think, as a matriarch of this kind of organizing in New York, it's always like really valuable to like find and sit with elders like her, because she's like, oh no, I've been like weaving, and if it's a resource, I know it and I can share it. And so I think there's always so much value in connecting with people who are excited and eager to share stories. I think that like transparency that you named Omowale as a way to like establish integrity is always really helpful too. I'm just naming that as like as a Southerner, oftentimes it can feel like, hey, we just want the knowledge, we don't want the relationship. And I'm like, oh, but the relationship comes first. And so I think those are the key things that I thought about just around like tips for people who are interested in getting into land work. It's been really like, people have named a lot of like historical kind of examples. I think someone lifted up like Baba Malik Akini with Detroit Community Black Food Sovereignty Network, which used to be Security Network, but they've like evolved how they talk about their work in Detroit. I tried to lift up the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which is a 56-year-old Black farming network rooted across the Southeast, that also does work in the Caribbean and internationally. And so there's just like, yeah, I I'm eager to like share in those resources, but it's not just sharing the resources, but like find a person, find a person that you can learn from and listen to, and like really listen to, because we're just like full of stories and connectivity and opportunities for like practical engagement.
Nice. So I'm going to put some names in the chat. So these are definitely orgs that are farmers, and if other folks know any farmers, and I'm particularly trying to share with folks cooperatives and or intentional communities that that we're familiar with, that we've been working with in currently, right? And so Black Farmers United, I see Martha Williams in the building, does great work, especially on behalf of Liberation Farm and so many other farmers. So Northeast Farmers of Color, Land Trust, man, they've been dope. I think one of the crazy things, the dope things that I think folks, should know, that a lot of the folks behind this, or a lot of the are women, or Black women, behind a lot of these spaces. Like Karen Washington, folks, if you don't know, then need to know about Karen Washington. That's just been a mentor for well over 10 years. I mentioned Cooperation Jackson. We work with them, and we try to do some more work with them there in Jackson, Mississippi. BIPOC Intentional Community Council. They're like a lot of those folks on the West Coast. We kind of got brought into their space, in their Midwest as well, and they're super supportive. They're likely on here, as well. Black farmers and urban growers. I remember when they came, and that's a lot of this stuff. Karen Washington is behind these particular spaces, man. So it's like it's crazy. Like folks but this is when I'm saying organizing, I'm talking about like the organizing, particular like institutions, and I want to put that in a context, and so I want to bring up, Septima, Clark. Folks that might be familiar with Septima Clark, connected with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but she really was doing some work, before there was a framework and it was an organizing machine, civil rights movement. She had been doing this for like 10, 20 years. You talking some decades before the work is actually organized. So, but the organization gave her a framework, right, to be able to actually communicate within that particular spaces. And I bring her up because not just in terms of the politics, involved, but that who was she organizing? Folks who were tied to the land. And I mean that in terms of feudalism too, like literally tied to the land at that time, as sharecroppers, being tied to the land, had to grow food, had to find all their resources was also tied to the land. The employment was tied to the land. The children, everybody, people worked around in in the land, in that space. And it's good to see folks dropping stuff in the in the chat. So I think we need to have that. So anyway, when I bring her up, I mean, I'm saying like she basically helped farmers understand education in that sense. So when we get tied to these institutions, we need to utilize this resource, because she was tied to the institution, but understood exactly what her responsibility was in that institution. Like, hold on a second, how can I actually bring this and make this beneficial to my people? So you know what I mean? So that's, that was so, important. So I want to say her name again, so we get, so we understand how to Google her and do research on her. Septima Clark. And then I'm going to just, give folks some of those. Those are some of the organizations working with, but there's some other farmers. It's a lot of great work that's happening in the Northeast. It's growing. Some of the work that Liberation Farm is doing right now, we're creating healing spaces. I think one of the things, in a healing space, it's like Man, you've been working all your life. Black folks, you came here to work. So if you tell me that you like work, you telling me, well, yeah, that's because of conditioning. That's colonialism. That's how it's supposed to happen. You're supposed to be, you conditioned to, anything, you do anything a number of times, you're gonna like how to work. You're gonna praise yourself in working, but relax, don't, we need to actually heal and rest. So when we work Liberation Farm, we actually have an event happening June 28th to the 30th. We usually try to make this sustainable. We making this one free. It's an entire weekend. We already got over 100 people signed up to come, and we get folks to come because of the connection and the organizing, connected to Black Veg Fest. People come to Black Veg Fest in the thousands every summer. They come on August 17th as we raise up Marcus Garvey, who I have not spoken about. I'm not going to go into it right now. But I bring that up because that connection, that organizing. When I connect with other comrades, I'm doing that. You know what I'm saying? So we can heal on a human to human level. But also I'm also like, how do we understand? How do we lift up liberation? And not waste each other's time.
Thank you. And then one last question, and then we're opening up. What does free to land mean to you?
When you prompted us with this question, I was like, whoa, it's a big one. Free the land means to me, when I think about the land as our kin, as an organism that's just integrated into our collective humanity. I think about the oppressions that we suffer through and struggle to resist are mirrored with what the land has been exposed to. And that the systems and structures that fuel oppression and imperialism are stories that the land can tell too. I use she, her pronouns when I talk about the land, so I just want to name that. But we share in her grief. And so when I hear free the land or free them all, I think beyond the people. I think about the entity that has held memory as visions alongside the continuity of our journey as Black people. I think about the spiritual implications of being in solidarity with the land. I think about the literal and figurative seeds that we plant, the fertility of our creativity and our imaginations. I think about the basis of life and life well lived, purpose. I think that meaning cultivates an imperative to protect, and you protect what matters the most to you, and you protect what nourishes you and ensures our survival. Our words are a frequency, and there's power in them. And the belief and integrity of what we say when we say free the land is what I hold in my heart when I say free the land.
When I say free the land, I mean that we need to make this decision to, actually, to capture the land where we are. And so that there's spaces where we are, where we're free, right? We feel like safe and comfortable. And when folks first started coming to Liberation Farm, there was this, a lot of the folks were coming from, the city. So folks that never even went out nowhere, in the rural areas, right? Never really. And it brought me back, and it's like, yeah, that's right. There's sometimes folks literally will stay in their city, right? You know what I mean? You grew up with bodegas, right there, and everything is, right. You could walk down over here and be right at the store, and go down there and be at the park. Like you come up, you in the park, and folks is, you know, that really hit me because folks are just feeling so comfortable. Like, and you go, depending on where you are in the world and how much smog there is, you know, we really didn't talk about climate much, right? Depending on how much where we are, you can't see the stars, right? And we sometimes we don't even bring it up that we can't even see the stars. I know at a point in New York City, we stopped being able to see the stars, right? Almost, you know, all the time. And moved upstate, you know, we see the stars all the time. I mean, the moon shine like the light is on in your house sometimes if you don't bring the curtains down. And folks got to, you know, see that and feel that, and then they had to make a decision about like, wow, you know what I mean? Do I want this convenience of being able to go to a bodega and eat just whatever they have there, right? Even if it's not good for me, just for what I just know. Sometimes it's just what you know, just like you never been, you know, into a rural area or understand or have this peace. And we don't have many times why we got a code switch because we don't have a particular peace. Can't even be yourselves. Sometimes I'll be in certain spaces and I'll be like, man, you speak your language. I don't want you to feel like you can't speak your language, even if I don't understand it, right? I would say that to people. You better believe I'm gonna say it to my folks. You know what I'm saying? Feel comfortable, you know, in a particular space, you know, to feel comfortable. So it's a lot of us who might not even feel comfortable. So we be trying to get to these huge aims, and I feel like that's critical. So when I say free the land, it comes with so much. It's not just the soil and the concrete, you know, it's not just the sediments and the things of that nature, you know, and just the water in that, but it's also, you know, free the land. I mean, like, you know, free your spirit, man. Like you don't even know what you're supposed to be doing right now because you ain't been healed, you know. Oftentimes, sometimes folks be like having a wonder and they be watching white folks do certain things, you know, creativity. That's because ain't nobody been on top of them. Ain't nobody been forcing them and been stifling them. You can grow. You've been in a particular space where you can actually grow. You get in that space and then it's like, man, it's feel weird. Like I could do this. So it's like trying to jump and you got the room. You ain't in the, you know what I'm saying? It's like the ceiling that came off. So that's when I'm saying you know, free the land. And so, you know, I'm hoping that we actively we engage in or organize and how do we connect certain things that it ain't just conversation. The conversations are, you know, strategic. So I think we're remembering that, you know, we're saying that. And I think there's certain, we used to say this all the time. And I think certain spaces, you know, every single movement had a particular saying. You know, I was in the Huru movement and we said Huru, it meant freedom, right? I feel like when you're saying free the land or you're saying freedom, that's the same thing. You know what I mean? It's a greeting. It's supposed to it's stay on your mind. It's supposed to you reminding yourself and you reminding your comrades when you say that, you know. And so when even when if I say peace, you know, I don't mean like, well, let's just jump to the peace. Nah, let's free the land, you know what I'm saying? Then we could get some peace, or we can get both of them, but just be clear which one come first. You know, the land has to, you know, to be free. I appreciate this that question.
Well, thank you so much, Alsie and Omowale today. I've been grateful to be in community with y'all. This call and the planning call has been a learning experience, nothing short of that for me. And I hope that attendees feel similarly. I appreciate your time, your energy, and your willingness to share all your experiences today and imparting your wisdom. So with that being said, we have one question in Q&A, and I see chats are coming in, but if folks want to jump on Stack, we can allow folks to speak so we can have some more engagement. Not the same as being in the same room, but just wanting to, if folks want to speak, we could accommodate that. But if not, in the meantime, I'll pose the question that's in the Q&A. This is a big one from. So what practical form does organizational structure and decision-making processes take in your work for Black liberation and land liberation? I'll put that in the chat. So big one.
Very big one. I'll try to also see what I can do. Practical form does organizational structure and decision-making processes. So what I will say is I feel really privileged to have been I guess farm and agrarian organizing for a little over 10 years. And that has taken the shape inside of collective formations, cooperatives, organizational institutions, nonprofits. There's like a lot of different ways that I've seen this organization and the coordination of our efforts be arranged and materialized. So I'll root myself in SAAFON, which is a 18-year-old farmer network. And one of our values is being farmer-led. And the first 10 years of SAAFON was very much so like Ma Cynthia as our founder. She was like always hot and ready for the road. She was just like, I'm showing up on farms, I'm going to conferences, I'm scooping up all the Black farmers that are using, like sustainable agriculture. And she'd be on the phone with them at 4 a.m., just all in. And I think when I entered as an institutional steward right after she transitioned and became an ancestor in 2016, I was very curious about like, what do we concretely mean by farmer-led? Like, are we a base building institution? And if so, what are the touch points where farmers actually get to make decisions about the shape that the network takes? Not just the shape that the network takes, but like, what are the programs, projects, and initiatives that the farmers are naming they would like to see us collectively organize around and resource ourselves through? And, so we've been trying to build out those mechanisms, not trying to build out, we've been actively building out those mechanisms. It's not like a magic seed where it just exists. And so we recently had a membership assembly. We'll be having state-based general assemblies where we are asking concrete questions of our base so that it informs the design of the programs that are meant for farmers across our network. And so that it's also the cultural work that it requires to kind of be like, hey, I like to nuance, because I think nonprofits are an interesting structure where it's just like, I see nonprofits as a vehicle, that's not the people. And so if you are trying to organize within that structure, it's like, well, how do you start to dismantle or dissolve the separation between not even the separation, but we are all collectively stewarding this thing, and some of us are and we're all resourced to do it in different ways. And so that, I'll name a concrete example. So we created a direct farmer support fund, which is a regranting program for our farmers. And, we have a farmer-led council that makes decisions about the farmers that get to receive the funds. We have a very small kind of dues paying structure, because it's hey, this is you can't pay it, it's cool. But this is how we energetically invest in our collective thing. And that money goes directly into the direct farmer support fund, so that farmers are making decisions about how resources are allocated across the collective and where we want to prioritize those investments. So that was yeah, I think something I wanted to kind of share that came to mind when thinking about like something very practical.
I'll try to be I'm gonna be brief on this one. I think I think the organizational structure that we've been accustomed to is been based on our limited um, you know uh, freedom. You know, even if we had been in an organization, I mean, I, some people, be familiar with it, and they probably even have said this. You know, spoken with so many folks who've been in corporate spaces, and they take those corporate spaces, corporate design as sometimes, even if they say, and they recognize the inability, for that, to operate and be themselves in that corporate space, they still take the way they move, technically, and how they take the design, the mechanisms that corporations, work on and go by and use that, right? And so we're really trying to break that down. It was even to give an example, Dr. King was trying to have Ella Baker, the idea for SNCC was Ella Baker's idea, right? Um, and people think it was just like inspired. Nah, she was like, actively fundraising for it, actively putting things together, in no way, shape, or form, the folks in the 80s or the 90s or today doing anything new. I'm not doing anything new. Harry Tubman was already creating healing spaces, where they were. Or cooperatives and things of that nature, right? So at that particular time, Dr. King wanted the SNCC to be, an offshoot or part of a youth division within SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Coalition, you know, and Ella Baker was like, yeah, we're not gonna do that. And this is gonna be, y'all gonna have to create the framework, and it was revolving, organizing. So it was actually pretty much at that time was really radical. And then, bunch of years ago, at least a lot of organizers organized, and then I think really stimulated, especially when George Bush took office, in 2000. We really was focusing a lot more on horizontal. Everybody didn't get there, but we was focusing a lot more on horizontal movements. How do we, that folks would take people's thoughts into consideration, and it was still people, trusted folks' leadership, who seniority, right? And such and such has been here for a long time, so obviously we got to listen to, or something such as from this geography, so obviously they're gonna have more, understanding about this particular, space. And so I just say, I'll leave it at that with those examples, instead of like framing it like how folks should actually, do that. But I appreciate that question.
We got some other ones in the chat. So one says, what was the objective for this panel today? What do you hope that we will take away? So if we have any key points that we want, key takeaways we want to share, and there's additional comment that says, when I think about free the land, I not only focus on farmland, but on real estate to build mental health facilities, communities, and hotels. Are these goals addressed in this collective? And so I can start off answering a little bit, and then I'll popcorn it, or whoever wants to volunteer, Omowale or Alsie, to answer. But the objective for this event, and a series of events, is to start talking about the themes of self-determination, collectivism, Black land relations, and Black ecologies. I think a lot of folks, when we were forming this committee, were saying, and I feel this also personally, that sometimes when we think about Black folks and nature or land, you think like, oh, Black folks can't swim, Black folks, that's some white people-ish when people are going on hikes and stuff like that. But it's because of like some severed relationships to land, severed understanding of who and what is nature. And I think me personally being located, growing up in like a rural environment where I I fear the water out of a respect for it. And I am able to have a relationship with land, with water, with all the things that are in my direct environment. Alsie used the word kinship earlier. I think that was part of the motivation just to have these conversations, have some more political education around land relations, Black farmers, Black organizing, and to just begin a series of conversations just to continue to build our consciousness and share our offerings. I'm very blessed that Alsie and Omowale have been, I've been taking so much notes because I'm learning in this process. And I think like that was an outcome I wanted for myself. And I, again, will say that I want, that's like my hope and intention for attendees, that you got something out of it. Y'all learned something more about the land today. Um, and then focusing on farmland, that question, the second part of the question, I think it was important for us to highlight Black land workers today and start off with on the organizational front, because I think a lot of times we think of these things as like theories or frameworks, and I think that is a part of it, but it's not everything. And I think coming from it from a place of practice, of praxis, is really important when we start this dialogue and this conversation. And it's something we hope to continue to build out. Yes, the mental health facilities, and yes, for land, for other things beyond farming. But I think thinking about food and land sovereignty, that goes hand in hand. And so I think that was the emphasis for today. But of course, we're open to suggestions and feedback. And so we could deep dive into that a little bit more. I see Omowale, you're off mute, so I'm assuming you want to take on some of the questions.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's, yeah, definitely. I'm gonna answer the first two rather quickly. I know I say that. For me, I think first organization, wise, I think we need to say, we want to organize folks. We want to be in community, right? Want to be connected to folks, want Black folks to come on, want to engage, or we want questions. Um, we want to wrestle with our ideas. We want to have a dialectical approach. Maybe some of these things are, are not clear. How are we communicating? Are we coming through clearly? Some of the theories and the ideas, are they outdated? The practical moves, I feel, or are they outdated? So I'm thinking about that, all the time, right? So I'm hoping to organize folks. I'd also put it in, a weekend, event. We, this is like this is so old, because folks in the South used to bring so many activists from the North, down, and we were organizing. You'd be coming in while we be making food, right? It I got to get a particular name. It'll come to me, but they are open their homes up, right? And Alsie had mentioned, Fannie Lou Hamer being kicked off land. They brought her in, into, other folks that took her in, into the home, right? So we opening up, our home is just it's a radical tradition. We understand that folks are going to be like, you know what I mean, man, you opening your home, man, I don't know about this, and so on and so forth. Well, we doing it in a secure manner, see the process. recognize that there is a process, and to come into our home and to come into our land. Matter of fact, if you ever went camping before, folks went camping, they have a, particular process, and they don't live there. So there is a particular process that we do have when folks come into the land. And let me tell you, it's a hospitable, space, but it's also Black folks. We want folks to, they come in, and we've had no issues, and up until this point, right? And we've had so many scores of, of folks. And this time we'll have, we had over 100 people, try to come through. So I see one of the questions about, building mental health facilities, hotels and things of that nature. That's what we on. In the sense that we treating people like family, but they understand this is not new stuff. And I gotta constantly say this to folks that Black folks have been doing this for a long time. No organizing that I've seen is new stuff. It might seem creative to folks. That's because it's being suppressed and we haven't seen it. We miss whole dates, whole years of work, whole geographies, of this type of work, that's been happening. When we look at mental health, we're looking at, I think, healing, but also in a professional way. And we want to bring folks who are relationship therapists, folks who are mental health, therapists, as well, to begin, having those kind of conversations. There's a host of that, but that's already in the conversation. That's not just us. That's not just me and my wife. That's also we're already connected with some folks. See our advisory board. See the folks, who on that who essentially do that work. Also, working with Black Farmers, United, as well, in NEFA, and hopefully, a lot more other folks, growing that idea. So it is it's a collective understanding. It don't come from one person, right? It's a collective, understanding. So when I'm working on some particular issue, I hope that somebody else got it. Because when we doing the camping, Nadia is the go-to person, when they come to the camping, you know what I mean? Even in terms of a lot of the farm work, you know what I mean? You're gonna hear me really talking, but I think organizing, you just have to be, you end up learning so many other skill sets, consistently. I'll pass it to Alsie.
I think y'all both answered it amazingly. I think J'Anna, yours specifically, because you curated this space and designed the questions. What comes up for me was this committee being activated within MXGM just this year. And it's not to say that the work of what we mean by free the land or the different practices across the formation haven't existed for decades, but I think this is meant to stimulate conversation. And I think my objective was to be in community and kinship with comrades who were in not just investigating some of these concepts and pathways, but who wanted to be in discussion about practical application. I think I got really excited and overwhelmed by the question around even just Black, self-sustaining Black food economies. Because when we start talking about economies, and we're talking about scale, intersection, infrastructure, there's a lot of dynamic pieces. I will also say that inside of liberation work and Black movement work, that is reproductive justice, there's so many dimensions to movement work that I honestly oftentimes find that food and land get kind of by the wayside, even with it being so concrete and tangible, and the foundation for how we eat and live. And so I was really excited about this being one of many conversations. Some of the other Q&As that are starting to come in are around like climate and energy and, you know, that I was like, how deep are we gonna get into this climate talk? Because that is part of the context too. And that like that's the gift of having a series is like there will be opportunities to like kind of dig into the different dimensions because food, land, and climate are so big. And so that's how I would answer that question. And yeah, I'm wondering if you want me to take a stab. Since I'm already talking, I'll try to take a stab at the questions, the other questions, and there's comments too, so you should absolutely read all of that. But it seems like the concrete question is curiosity about what we think about entering into this work of Black ecologies, particularly in the context of climate crisis in 2024 and moving forward. And how does unfolding time period affect what to consider as we get started now? And when I started getting into this work, a lot of the local farmers were, like talking about like economy, like this is growing food is like how we provide a living and a livelihood for ourselves. And the market channels, farming in the urban context were what they were. Like you gonna sell at a boutique farmer's market with a bunch of white folks, you gonna, like sell to restaurants, like to make it economically viable, because in all honesty, it's never been an economically viable profession. And so there has to be other ways of thinking about how we resource ourselves to be land workers, because there's so much parity in play, like in pay, and the like exploitation is rooted in plantation politics. And so it's like, the viability of like farming as profession is really nuanced too, because it's just like, well, I value being able to like wake up and be outside every day, like and not have a boss. But when I would talk to those farmers that I was working alongside, and we were like organizing around like, well, yeah, these white organization, money is flowing around, but like ain't no money or resourcing really getting to the workers. Like we're not just the workers, like this is our birthright. Like being producers and land stewards is our birthright. This is part of our Afro-Indigenous wisdom. Like these are our life ways. There's so much like spirit connected to why we choose to tend the land and cultivate food for community. And I remember one of the farmers being like, well, when shit goes down, everybody gonna be looking to us for food. And I was like, are we preparing for that though? Like when grocery stores or our ports start closing, or just like, I mean, the food right now, a bag of apples wasn't always the cost of a bag of apples that it is right now. And so like, what are we doing to prepare ourselves to be able to take care as many of our people as we can? Because we know that like the structures, particularly the governmental ones and the institutions, are never going to consider us first, in the middle, or at all. And so it's like, what ways are we empowering ourselves? What connections are we growing so that we can survive the end of the world together? Because it's like societal and environmental collapse happening like in tandem and in like lockstep with each other is not only upsetting, it can be like feel defeating. And it's like farmers and agrarians are part of frontline communities who know how to survive it, right? Like our in the global South, in the Caribbean, along our coasts, like are people who are like, when it got too hot, or like the fact that I have to replant, like I have to start my whole farm again after every hurricane, like those are, but even when you're talking about like clean water, energy, solar power, like those are those are all, I think, need to be talked about in tandem with like how we survive. I think also the like investment and importance in like the relational and physical infrastructure that we need to make it make sense at the scale of community that we operate within, right? Where, I'm all about a rural revival because I'm like, yo, the way we being policed in cities look a lot different in my hometown, right? Like I have so much more freedom of movement and autonomy for like me and all my people here, right? And so those are, and sorry, I get really, I feel really passionate about this, but like when COVID and the pandemic popped off, and people were like, every time I go to the grocery store, ain't nothing there. Or that like, I went to Tractor Supply and they ain't have no more little baby chicks because everyone was like, don't I need my own chickens? Like the like crisis response that people have is always going to be centered around food and like, can I move freely? Right? Like I called all my folks. I said, how many beds y'all got? Can y'all take animals? Like, I don't want to be under no martial law in no city. And so, though, but people were also looking both in this kind of like, viral crisis alongside like the hurricane strengthening, right? I have a sweet, amazing friend whose family has been stewarding their land for over 100 years, and they focus on agritourism. That's the way they like bring money in for their land, for their families. And but like it's people who were in New Orleans on the coast needed housing, they were able to use the cabins that they had on their land to accommodate the families that needed to be there for 3, 4, 6 weeks when they had to evacuate. And so that well water, the physical infrastructure for like living, for housing, for making soap, for, like those are all the things that I feel like really need to be prioritized when we're talking about resource investments. And even when we're talking about reparations, like those are when I don't think it's to dilute when we're saying, but it's this and this and this and this too, it's like, well, how do we, we're not a monolith, but my understanding of abolition is like we tear it down, we build it up. So like I want to be in the number of the people who are like working to build, and like in solidarity and honoring the people who are fighting. And like, how are we sharing our like resource and energy to make sure that those things are happening in tandem when like crisis is already here? Sorry, I hope I like tried to answer both. Ooh, decentralized finance. I'm gonna step away for that one.
So thank you, Elsie. I think I want to just like jump in a little bit on the thinking about the climate crisis and also about further, like I'm just gonna repeat something Elsie said, basically. I'm co-signing, but I just wanted to harp on a couple points. So being prepared of the end for the end of the world is something we've always had to do since contact. And I think I want to like remember that and hold that as we think about building new worlds for new circumstances and conditions. But like coastlines have been eroding. The land is unchanged, is forever changed by the ways that we have been using it for the past few centuries. And so I want to like think about the ecological crises and climate change. There's like studies that have been done that show that like the murder and slaughter, genocide um, of indigenous people in North American continent caused the climate to shift as early as in the 1400s, 1500s. And we have been experiencing ends of worlds for a very long time, 500 plus years, and we've continued to survive. And that is without a doubt based on the world building capacities of folks that have been determined to live, have been committed to Black life, Black survival, Black thriving, and we stand on the shoulder of giants. We've heard so many names of folks that we have in the chat and in the conversation of the shoulders we stand on. And I just want to bring that up when we think about like some of the doom that comes with like conversations around climate change in this particular era. And also to say that, yeah, we have been adapting for climate change for a long time. The question in the Q&A was saying that was talking about like growing up in rural, having a mother who grew up in rural Jamaica. And I can say I live across the street from a beach. My childhood home is there. And I was thinking a lot about how when the sea levels rise, which is predicted to happen in the next couple decades, what I will do. And in my conversation with my elders, they're like, well, the coastline was not that coastline, and people used to live there. And the sea came and they moved, and we've adapted and we will continue to adapt. And I think that this is the importance of the series is that to adapt, you need skill and you have to have wisdom and knowledge. So talk to your elders, build communities like this. I saw a thing in the chat, a comment in the chat about sharing herbal medicines and native medicines. And I was like, a Skillshare would be an amazing political education tool and amazing part of this continuation of this series, because I think there is that lack of knowledge transfer that has been happening with our forced and coerced migrations, with our severing with relationships to the land. And so I just want to like uplift some of the stuff Alsie was saying and also share just some of my own story as well. And then there was like talk about one of the questions was saying that by the middle of the 21st century, fossil fuel energy, especially oil, would be in significant global decline, greatly impacting forms of economy and aggravating racialized divisions. How have we thought about the formation of a Black community going forward? And I think the same sentiments of unstable climate, unstable economy, we've lived through it, we'll continue to live through it. So get ready. So stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Kind of is what I'm thinking around that. And then just to quickly go through these because we are half an hour over and I see we're still engaging in the chat, but thoughts on utilizing decentralized finance? Alsie, you said you wanted to step back from that question. I have no knowledge about decentralized finance, so I will defer as well.
I'm not gonna try to go into that at all. And for Casio Wilson could add some more context to it, then I think the folks on the panel might be able to communicate a little bit more on that. But we can only kind of guess where you're going with that. I think I appreciate the question. I'm gonna go to the middle. I felt like y'all did a great job, in answering that. But this question that I'm looking at in the raising up of fossil fuel energy oil. So my daughter just had a debate. A high school is I had a debate with another high school in New York City. I shout my daughter out, Aziza. And the topic, of course, was climate change, right? And it was specifically on carbon tax. And then we did, where do folks feel on where do they lie on carbon tax, right? And this is a question that I don't, a lot of folks might not communicate. So I helped her with this question. She knows that one of the issues that we address at Black Veg Fest is addressing, climate change, the environment that impacts us, right? If we're talking about, especially when we talk about fossil fuel. So the interesting thing is we might look at fossil fuel, a lot of folks, like, nah, we don't want to do, fossil fuel is not sustainable, right? Well, this is going to come up, part of it's on each, platform of, candidates, right? And fossil fuel is actually #1 for the Republican Party, right? And so just because they happen to be the main, party, well, that issue is going to come up, and that's going to be centered. So, but we have to communicate. We have to, back to self-determination. We have to figure out the context, and then we have to figure out what's Black folks, our opinion, and what's our thoughts on that. What's our, how do we move, away from fossil fuel, or what should our energy be? We using energy, so of course we gotta, we have to decide on what type of, energy we need to be running on, right? So there's wind energy. Some folks are gonna say that's not sustainable, that's not reliable, rather. But there's also, there's water energy, as well. There's so many different forms of energy. There was also, Republican Party also mentioned that they were going to focus on nuclear energy, as well. The conversation, we haven't really, dived in, too much how close we are to actually utilizing and relying on nuclear energy. So we take it for granted that we're going to go ahead and utilize. We're going to focus on gas. We're going to do fracking. So we got to talk about, fracking, right? So we're exposed to this and we utilize it in such a way. Or we can start talking about moving away from, these energy forces, but also have another conversation, on this. And so I think, J'Anna, we have it, another conversation, that's going to be focused more on climate change. But I think folks first have to, we have to understand what is climate change and what is, global warming, is, as well. When I look at, global warming, or what that is, and so in the last, just 100 years, or as my daughter was already doing a lot of great research in her last, 10 years, every single year is hotter than the last, right? And so we're raising sea levels. So our sea level is raising, meaning that our ice caps, are melting. And so the sea level is raising as the earth begins to get warmer, right? And so this is CO2s, right? We breathe this out. So we need trees, right? We need the oxygen that trees come in and bring down our CO2s. As we capture the CO2s, they don't go into our atmosphere, and we end up losing our support in our ozone layer, right? So we can keep the earth cooler. So as it gets hotter and hotter, we're destroying ourselves. And so what are the main issues? What are the main things that are actually doing that? CO2 emissions, but also methane gas. And so two of those are actually coming to our reliance on production, agricultural production. We get no resources from this as well. We also get, I was saying earlier, in terms of, subsidization, we don't get any of the dollars from the government when it comes to the farming, right? We have to do every single thing ourselves, we don't get any of those resources. And so I think just with this context, instead of answering and giving the solutions on that, as far as, climate change, because we're still trying to figure that out. But the main thing, I think, if I was to think, any type of solution, we have to, most of, or 80 to 90% comes from these, from 100 companies, so it's not just on individuals, it's the fact that they actually build, and they overproduce, right? And at our expense. So we pay for them, we pay as consumers, they build and they create these items. And when we talk about methane gas, that's animals, basically letting off methane gas, but that's also our transportation systems as well. And so we've been, empowering them. So when we even talk about this idea of relaxing agriculture, produce and eating better. I mean, obviously, it's a win-win for us because we begin to talk about something that's healthier. Again, Albania Fulton, Dr. Albania Fulton, she's mentioned in my book, but she has her own books, that are out there. And she literally was educating folks, and she was widely known. But I'm going to put her name in there. So this is somebody who was talking about, food and eating, healthy, but also it would have a positive impact just on our community, because the first folks are going to be affected is going to be Caribbean. It's going to be, it's going to be Africa. It's going to be Latin America. But who's actually benefiting? The Western nations are benefiting, the most. Europe, North America, benefiting off our resources. And so this is just something to just to kind of, think about a little bit. I think we first have to, understand, climate change, a lot more before we can actually delve into some of the, actual, solutions.
Omowale, I hope you don't mind me hopping in. I just want to thank you all, particularly our moderator, J'Anna, and Omowale, and our tech whiz, whose name I didn't catch when we got on the call, but like all of the participation in the chat has been super sweet. I have to run to another call, but this was really awesome, and I signed up to hopefully be able to come to the next. So I'll see you all, and I left my email in the chat in case anybody wants to follow up. I'm always happy to share and exchange stories and knowledge, and point you where you're looking.
Thank you so much, Alsie.
Thank you, sis.
So with that, I think it's a good time to wrap up. Thank y'all for staying 40 minutes after our allotted time. Thank you for everyone that made this event possible, the entire Land, Food, and Climate Committee, Omowale and Alsie, and everyone who attended. Connect with us with the QR code or the link in the chat. I know Zalika also dropped some more MXGM specific resources in the chat as well. And if you haven't seen the book recs, the websites, the knowledge that was being circled in the chat, please do so. Our next event is June 2nd. We will have JT Rohn, who is critical to the formation of a Black Ecologies framework, speaking, and that will be in collaboration with the Gender and Sexual Justice Committee, as we'll be talking about Black ecologies and even going into the Black sexual ecologies themes. Thank you, everybody, again.